guests, Tavleen Singh, author, Kiran Karnik, former Nasscom chief and many, many things, and Vivek Dehejia, author and professor and all kinds of things. I am Jagannathan. I am a journalist and nothing else. So what I would like to start off with, the theme is be bold, stay real. Now, I think this is an advice probably wasted on any Indian for a very simple reason, that you've got to be very bold and very real if you have to survive in this difficult country. I think every day is a difficult day for most Indians. Leave aside the 0.001% who may be ultra rich and who may live in their own ivory towers and cocoon places. But survival for all of us, even if you are, say, relatively better off. I think Tavleen spent, a good part of the last half hour stuck in traffic. So I think everything is, it's an effort to get to work, it's an effort to work, it's an effort to get things done. That's thing. So if you're not bold and if you're not courageous, I think every Indian deserves a medal just for surviving this place. So in that sense, I would say we are bold, we are real. But of course, that's a very, it's not a dismissive kind of argument. But what I think I would like to say is that this is a very complex country, it's a very diverse country, and with all that, we have preserved a basic thing like democracy, so which makes life actually more difficult and also simpler. We don't realize the benefits of democracy because we can only see the demerits of it right now. Because you think everybody is arguing, and you have Amartya Sen saying that we are the argumentative Indians. Actually, and we have Pratap Bhanu Mehta saying yesterday that we are too consensual, we don't argue enough. So we have an argument even over whether we are argumentative. So we seldom really come to conclusions where we can get ahead. And I think the key thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that the key is the diversity of this country, which helps progress and also impedes progress, because we are open to more ideas and at the same time we are close to them because we are too diverse. Second thing is, we have the sheer numbers of people are daunting. In anything you do in India has to be bold. But if you're talking about 1.2 billion people, if you're not bold, you can't get anywhere. But at the same time, if you're too bold, you can't get anywhere either. So the opposite of everything you say in India is automatically true. Anything you do, even a minor program will be the world's biggest, the world's largest, the world's stupidest, world's everything. Every est can be added to anything you say in India. So because, like, for example, you have a silly program called a food security bill, which will neither give you food nor security. But you will still do it because you have so many people, you have some 300 million people who are not getting enough food, and you will still do it. So it is the world's largest food security program, and it may also be the world's stupidest. So you will do it because you have to get yourself elected. Then you have, not that it's not needed, but that's not the way to do it. You have to do it. Then you have everything. You're the fourth largest economy in terms of purchasing power, so you're huge. Whatever you do, you're the largest. So you have to be bold in order to make changes. But if you don't stay real in India, you can't get anything done. We have the best laws in the world and the worst implementation. So you have been bold when it comes to legislation, but you have been very timid when it comes to implementing them, which means you need boldness in a different area. So whether it's our politics, whether it's our society, whether it's our economics, whatever it is, I think the theme is very valid and we need to discuss that. So in the coming 15 minutes, I will ask all my three panelists. We start with Vivek Dehejia, who will focus on the economic and demographic challenges of this country. He will talk for about 5 minutes. Then I'll shift to Kiran, who will talk more about society and its challenges and the way he sees them. Then we'll talk to Tavleen, who will be looking at the politics that might be screwing it all up or whatever it is, and the media which might be playing, adding fuel to the fire. And we'll discuss that. And then we'll look at what's the way forward. How do you get bold and real and get things done instead of just being bold and real and surviving? So, Vivek, can we start off?
Now, here's a fact to help keep things real. The median age in India is 25. And looking at this room, actually, it probably would be even lower in this room. In other words, half the people in this country are 25 or younger. And what that means is that half the people in this country really only know the post-1991 India of post-liberalization. They've grown up in a different India than their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents. They're the children of 1991. And many of you here probably weren't even born when India opened itself up to the world. And as such, this enormous mass of young people we have in this country, and I can see many young faces here, you have aspirations, you have dreams, you want to be bold. They want to be bold. But they often feel stymied by a system, by institutions, by a type of governance, which is a word that's often used, that was set up not even by their parents or grandparents, even their great-grandparents' generation set up these institutions that, in a sense, often young people feel holds them back. These are structures, whether it's in politics, business, entertainment, the media, where nepotism and corruption are rife, cronyism, dynasticism, all of these things that give someone in a position of privilege access which someone else doesn't have, even though that other person might have greater merit on their side. And this is made worse by, if you like, the unfinished reforms. I mean, we had sort of two bursts of major economic reforms in India under Prime Minister Rao, and I say that advisedly, the Rao reforms, and then under the NDA. And we've had now 9 years of a rolling back to the old socialist sort of dirigist mindset, and Jaggi mentioned the food security bill. We can talk more about that. I've written about it, you've written about it as well. So this adds to the frustration that an economy which was growing at about close to 9.5, we almost hit 10, we got close to 10, has now fallen back down to earth to 4.5%, 5%. And this will further stymie aspirations and make it therefore harder to be bold and stay focused on these sort of realistic possibilities. Now, I won't belabor the point, but there are glimmerings of change. We might be on the cusp of a major change in India. Next year's elections might represent the first time where the urban middle classes, young people, actually can have a decisive impact, maybe not on the outcome, but at least the agenda. What are we talking about? Corruption, governance, reform, coming back onto the agenda, which has been absent for the last 9 years. So that is a measure of the growing importance of this bolder, younger generation. And I think it's too early to say. I think next year may be a little too early for that turning point, but at least the ideas are there, the concepts are there. And from being sort of passive agents, the urban middle classes are now playing an active role in politics, in discussion, in analysis. Now, I'll just finish up. I don't want to take too much time, just with pointing out some of the downsides, the darker side of the picture. I mean, we all often talk about this enormous transition we're making, a huge change, hundreds of millions of people, a huge demographic change in this country. Now, these young people, you guys, are going to have to find jobs at some point, be educated, get the skills and the training you need, and then find gainful employment. Now, where are those jobs going to come from in the absence of a major set of structural economic reforms? And what the worrisome scenario, and this is what really worries me, is that if one looks around the world, when you have sort of lots of young people who are ambitious, who have aspirations, but those aspirations are frustrated or left unfulfilled, for whatever reason, you have a recipe for social chaos, for social disaster. Look at what happened in the Arab Spring. Look at what's happening now in Brazil. This is something one sees around the world. And often this manifests in very specific types of sort of social ills. There's very strong evidence, for instance, that when you have what's called a youth bulge, you have a rise in violence, a rise in crime, violence against women in particular is very strongly correlated with the youth bulge. And what this suggests is that it's not just economics, it isn't just politics, it's a moral imperative for all of us in India to try and now sort out, after a number of years of drift, get our act together, start dealing with problems like governance, like infrastructure, like corruption. And we have to therefore create this platform, otherwise we're going to have lots of people with lots of ambitions who are educated, perhaps not, but who don't have the opportunities that they rightly feel that this country owes them after so many years of struggle, and of dealing with all sorts of huge difficulties. So I would say that there's both, we have to be bold and look forward, but we have to be mindful of the dangers and the traps that lie ahead of us, and that's, I think, where the realism comes in. Thanks, I'll stop there. Thank you.
First, congratulations to Kumar and the Leapfrog team. I think this is a great effort, a very necessary effort. You're starting here, Kumar. Next year, you'll have to have something 2 or 3 times this size. I'm absolutely sure. So, but it's a great start, and I think it's a great theme to put together here. You talked of content and entertainment, and yes, I understand what you're saying. And it takes me back many years ago when I started with Discovery Channel here, and it's very content heavy. And we had little choice but then to coin a new catchphrase, which is to call it real life entertainment. So I understand where you are. But yes, real life can be entertaining, as we see all the time, as long as you wear the right glasses to look through them. I want to, in a sense, start with where Vivek almost ended. And he talked of the Arab Spring and Brazil, but I want to talk of India. And I want to talk of being real and being bold. It's sort of, and I'm glad in your introduction, Jagannathan, you changed a little bit from what you said earlier, because I thought you were trying to say, when we were chatting earlier, that be bold, but stay real. And I think the reverse is true, which you alluded to. In India, we have no choice but to be bold, because when you look at reality, there is no choice but to do that. And that's why I refer back to what Vivek said in terms of the social unrest. If you look at India, and yes, Jagannathan mentioned biggest, stupidest, whatever. We're the country that has the maximum number of starving people. We are the country that has the maximum number of illiterate people. We're the country that has the maximum number of people below the poverty line. So take your pick, and I think that is reality, not necessarily this thing here. And if you want to get out of that reality, you have to be bold. Not because you feel for your fellow human beings, because many people don't. But the reality is, if you don't do that, then you're in for trouble. And you're in for trouble because while we talk of ecological sustainability and concerns about that, I think the bigger problem facing India, not that ecological sustainability is not important, I think it's very critical, but the bigger problem facing India is social sustainability. This model of development, even if you're growing at 8 or 9% a year, which we are not in the last 2 years, 3 years, unless you can reduce the inequities and unless you can take care of this ferment from below, you're going to have Chhattisgarhs happening all over the country. And I think the solution to that, of course, is, as many, at least some people in government and many, many friends in media feel, bomb the hell out of them. And this concerns me as much as the being bold and being real is, because it's amazing to me the kind of warlike noises emanating from our media, whether it's regard to our neighbors or with regard to our own countrymen, is fantastic. I remember when the CRPF thing happened, a terrible tragedy, half the media was saying, send the Air Force in. Hey, send the Air Force in to do what? To do exactly what? To bomb our own people? And I think that's a matter of concern. And the root cause of that is really the problem of deep, deep inequity. Yes, there are some people who are ideologically driven and will do it irrespective of anything. But the large mass of people who go through this are because of the inequities in our society, not just the inequity between two groups, but the huge inequity between those who are starving and those who live in multi-billion-dollar houses down the road from here. Nothing good or bad about either, but the reality is the country cannot survive on that kind of basis, and you see signs of that already. Vivek alluded to other social ills. Yes, you would get smaller ones comparatively, like crime, crime against women, general thefts and robberies, dacoities, all kinds of things, but the bigger manifestation will be a little more organized. And I think, therefore, for this country, you cannot but afford not to be bold. Fortunately, we have shown that in some areas we can be bold. And I would speak with a couple of areas of which I'm very familiar. And I don't want to get into the politics of it because I think we will debate that later and Tavleen may speak more about it. When I look at what we have done in the programs, like in the space program, when we look at something which we are all much more familiar with, telecommunications, we've seen what bold steps can do and what bold steps can achieve. We are one of the leading powers in space, not for the moon landings, which are good but don't excite me. It's for what we use space for in this country. It is for using things like communication, weather forecasting, remote sensing, where we're able to help those in areas where you need help. Information, communication, getting across, sending stuff to them. being able to empower those who need empowerment by taking communication to them. And the most visible form of that, which we all have today, is this little device which we carry around, and not just you and I, but at least 600 to 700 million Indians carry those. Some are duplicated, but it's a huge number. And doubtless in a year or so, it will cross 1 billion. And I think that kind of bold thinking that can transform the country is what we need. And then what can you do with this device? I think that's the challenge for people here, particularly the young people, that you have this ability to reach millions, maybe 1 billion Indians. What can you do with that? What can you send them that will help them in their lives, that will help to change the country, that will help to integrate them in the country and help to reduce the kind of inequities which we see, whether it's inequities with regard to literacy or health information or agricultural information or just information which creates empowerment, because then you can demand better governance. The last point I want to make is with regard to governance, because I'm sure you'll hear some voices here, and I'm probably suspect I'll be a minority of one on this panel. I don't think there's anybody here who cannot see that we don't want good governance. But there is an increasing emphasis on just efficiency. And of course, the model for that is a little state north of here, which is efficient without a doubt. And I think those who question that are barking up the wrong tree. It's a very efficiently run state. It's done well for itself. And that's good. But I think we've got to question, and I'm not speaking of that state, I'm speaking more generally now, that efficiency with what end? Efficiency, as a famous person once said, and many of you would know who said this, to make the trains run on time. And okay, for those who don't, I might remind you that it was Mussolini in Italy in the days of fascism. So you have a good dictatorships that works very efficiently. Another model of that, and not necessarily negatively all through, but is Singapore. And my friends from the corporate world just love Singapore. They say what we need is one strong leader who makes decisions and drives efficiency. Now, Singapore has had a better model, but there are models of a different kind, where you drive that kind of efficiency at whose cost. And I think the worry is not just the net gain, which efficiency gets you, but not in the process of the net gain, who gets more and who gets less. As you can see straight away arithmetically, you can yet have a net gain by having a bigger plus and a smaller minus. But who's gaining and who's losing? It's the people here, you and I, who gain, and is it the poor who lose? Now, this is not bleeding heart liberalism, which is why I started with the bigger concept of saying pure pragmatism. Okay, you don't care for somebody who's suffering and say his fault or her fault that she's uneducated, poor, and living out in the countryside where nobody cares. You might take that attitude. But the fact is that with that attitude, that's going to come home and roost sometime, because you're not going to be very safe in your homes and cities. Less so in Bombay, but in Delhi we have these gated communities which are completely self-sufficient. They drill their own tube wells so that they own water, they have their own security, they have their own power because they run off diesel generators, and they think they don't need anything from the outside world till the outside world crawls in on them. And I would refer you, many, many places, but if you want a nice way of looking at it, you must have read Arvind Adiga's White Tiger. Read that, and that'll tell you something. Or if you want a worse situation from the inside out, read Narendra Jadav's Outcast to get you a sense of social oppression, not just economic oppression. And I think this reminds you of what might happen, whether you care or not, if you don't take care of some of these aspects. Therefore, I think we have no choice but to be real and therefore be bold. Thank you.
I'm going to be saying the opposite of much of what you heard just now from the last speaker, because I really believe that we are neither bold nor real in this country. And if we had been, and I particularly speak, I've been a columnist for 30 years and a journalist for 40 years, and my recent book is called Darbar, which was really an attempt to be bold and real about the things that have gone wrong in India. And I have to tell you that although it's sold very well, thank God, despite the reviews, I didn't get a single good review. And the reason was that I dared to attack the system of dynastic democracy, which the prime example of is the Gandhi family. And in Delhi, as a journalist who's worked all my life in Delhi, there's a system of self-censorship in operation, where we don't criticize our royal family. So, because we are currently ruled by a member who married into the royal family, and who before she got married had never even read a newspaper, which is a big comment, it's good for her that she's done so well, but it's a big comment on your political class. Because if no political leader out of 1 billion people, if we haven't been able to produce one political leader who could take on an Italian housewife, we're really in big trouble. That's the reality, okay? And in the past, Vivek referred, and I'm very glad that you did, to the reversal of the reforms that have taken place in the past 10 years. It is incalculable. The reversal. If it continues, none of you will have jobs. You'll all have to try and get jobs in government in future, and government does not have the capacity to give those jobs. Now, under Sonia Gandhi, there's been a deliberate reversal of this because dynasty cannot survive when middle classes grow. So what has happened is that if you continue to treat this country as if it was a country of beggars, which it is not, and give them, little handouts, the food security bill will bankrupt India. And forget anything else, you will need to be importing grain like we once did in the 60s, because there is no way that it can work. If we were bold in the media, there would have been 1,000 articles on that every day. There are not, right? But the reason why Dynasty was the subject of my last book, and I really recommend that you read it if you want to understand what went wrong. Dynasties survive when the people are illiterate and poor forever. That is, when you speak of the poor Naxals and the poverty, etc., you're actually backing the kind of statism that Sonia Gandhi believes in and that the Congress party believes in. And it is because of that that we have remained poor. This is one of the richest countries in the world. We have no reason to be poor. We've been impoverished by economic policy. I'm sorry to Kiran to point to you, but the only prosperity we've seen, this whole middle class that you see, is the product of the past 20 years of reform. Before that, there were no middle classes. There was the rulers and the people. The people were very, very poor. The rulers got increasingly rich. It was a defunct, evil system. And we are now actually at a point when we're trying to bring it back. So we need to be very, very careful. And if we were more bold and more real about what is happening, we wouldn't have allowed this to happen. But because of the media having let you down so badly, you've turned Parliament into what a political friend of mine calls a private diners club. That's very, very dangerous. There are I see so many young people here. There must be some of you who have a spirit of public service and who would like to become MPs and MLAs. You cannot unless you have a daddy or a mummy or an uncle who's in politics. Now that is a shocking bit of reality. Has the Indian media been bold enough to talk about it? Never. Hardly ever. And in my case, when Darbar came out, I got from from friends even, they either said, oh, it's a tell-all book about Sonia Gandhi, which it's not. Or they said, the thing is that Tavleen was dropped by Sonia Gandhi, so she wrote this book, right? It is a book about a historical phenomenon that we have not examined. And the reason why we haven't examined it is that India is the one country in the world where journalists don't write books. They mostly, about 99% of the journalists I know, wouldn't dream of writing a book. Every foreign correspondent who spends 2 years in Delhi writes a book. We have political leaders who never write their own autobiographies, and we don't dare to write their biographies because we're not bold and real enough to tell the truth. So, if you think we're a bold and real country, you're completely wrong. We are neither bold nor real, and that's a very worrying thing. But it's very good to have a non-fiction literary festival, and I wish you all the luck to have it every year.
We have a median age of 25 in this country, and 2/3 of the population is below 35 years of age. These are all people who are coming into the job market or have just got into the job market. They have aspirations. A lot of them are urban people. A lot of them are migrating from rural areas to this thing like that. The key thing is, if we are not bold, if we are not get real about how do you provide them with jobs, try and meet some of their aspirations so that they don't develop into something negative, you got to do something about that. And the answer is not to provide make-work schemes where I think you tell people to dig up a hole and fill it up. That's not the way to get bold and real. That's the timid way of tackling it. That's not the real thing. As far as Kiran said, I think he has identified the problem very clearly. I think where we might differ or even agree, the problem is very clear. You've got about 300 million people who don't get enough to eat. You have a lot of malnutrition. You've got a lot of poverty. But the story of India is not the story only of poverty that we see there. You've got to see, if you've got to tackle that poverty, you've got to be bold and you've got to be real. And what that bold and real is where I think many failures are happening. Because there is a way to deal with it and which we have not yet dealt with, which we will tackle in the discussion. And I think Tavleen clearly had a different position from Kiran, in the sense she feels that the politics of this country is probably ruining us in many ways, largely to some extent because of the kind of dynastic politics that continues. But of course, many other parties have also become dynastic in the regions, and so dynasty seems to be something that's very Indian in its orientation. So let me just, this is the rough backdrop. I have put it, consolidated with part of my own leanings. But I think Vivek, to take your point forward, basically you talked about the demographics and what the challenges are, right? So what do you think a government should do if you say you want to be bold and tackle the real issues? What do you think needs to be done?
Thanks to Kiran and Tavleen for fascinating presentations. I mean, I'll just say, can I just to add a bit of context to what Tavleen had said earlier and also what you said, Jaggi, which is that one of the failures, I mean, one of the reasons we've had this 9 years of a rollback to socialism is what I call a basic original sin of our original economic reform in 1991, which is no one actually bothered to make the case for reform. Reform was always done by stealth, always done at the point of a gun in a crisis mode, without really a real conviction behind it. Now, the NDA, I think, had some conviction when they pushed reforms. Now, the other story there, which we haven't talked about, is what happened in 2004. And I can put in a plug for my book here. Hope you come tomorrow to our session, where we look at the wrong lessons that came out of 2004. The whole, and this is, again, where the media has spun a narrative that it was India shining that backfired, and all of them, one keeps reading the same thing. The truth is quite different. And we can talk about that. That's a chapter in our book. But what the effect of that, of the NDA's defeat in 2004, is the wrong impression that got created that, look, one cannot have good economics and good politics going hand in hand. And therefore, it's in a sense stoked those who never really believed in reform to begin with to then go back to the old playbook. And I think that's part of the story of what happened in 2004, which is, of course, why next year's elections are so critically important, so crucially important, whichever party, whoever happens to win, again, pushing this reform agenda forward. Now, what are the things that have to be done? Things that are not even really on the agenda now, Jaggi. I mean, labor law reform, we're not even talking about it.
Right.
But think about it this way. With all of you, young people here, how are you going to get a job? As Tavleen said, the government is not going to hire you, and nor do we want to be in a society where everyone's working for the government. That was the old India. That was the Soviet Union, where everyone was a civil servant of one type or another. So that means the jobs are in the private sector. But how are you going to get those jobs if we've got a legal infrastructure, an administrative structure that retards the growth of jobs, of innovation, of employment? That's the dark shadow which I talked about, which is this demographic nightmare scenario, where you've got hundreds of millions of young people who have aspirations, have ambitions, but those aspirations are unfulfilled or frustrated. And that's, therefore, so I think the keys are going to be education, unshackling the labor market, which is yet to be done, and infrastructure. I mean, we've seen the disastrous state of infrastructure just in the last couple of days. a brand new airport built 3 years ago has a leaky roof. I mean, it's absolutely an embarrassment that we have this situation in our nation's capital. And that's not because of population growth, that's because of corruption and shoddy workmanship, right? Graft, very simple reasons. So there's no excuse for that. That you can say, yes, population pressure is pushing on us, that's true. But infrastructure, even for the people that are now using the system, is substandard. So those are, I think, I don't want to, again, monopolize this part, but those are, I think, a few key ideas that we have to talk about, Jaggi.
Right. One of the things, in fact, if you have read the headlines today, I mean, let's assume for a minute, forget socialism and capitalism, and let's assume the UP has taken us to socialism. But did they do even socialism boldly? What have you seen? We have had, from 2003 to 2011, you had very fast growth, barring 1 year, which was the Lehman crisis year. You had extremely fast growth. And it's only in the last 1 or 2 years that we have had a slowdown. And what did you do? What is today's morning's headlines? It says unemployment has risen. So has your socialism created, you have a Manrega scheme that is supposed to make work for you. You have an economy going like gangbusters till 2011. You do an extraordinary economic stimulus and you still don't create jobs. Your unemployment has gone up. That's what you have done. Okay, so does this show that you even implemented socialism boldly? If that is the case, we should have had a higher rate of employment and this thing. So what you have done is you have not done, I mean, I agree with Vivek, but I'm just posing the opposite question. Let's assume you are of a different ideological bent. And did you do that? Possibly. Did you do that boldly? No, you didn't. You are actually doing timid things. In fact, jobs schemes are done timidly. In fact, your food security is done timidly. Why are you doing food security? Just to get re-elected, not because you want to remove malnutrition. That's your problem. So, Kiran, so you identified the problem that we have to deal with this. But do you think this is the right way to deal with it?
I think there are some questions. I don't want to give easy solutions. Just two thoughts before before I come to your specific question. One is that if you look at the poorest states in the country, and particularly in not the periphery of India, but the rest of it, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, UP, Bihar, in none of those states, as you know, the party which tried to put this across the Congress has a government or got elected. So I think just something to question, therefore, that did the strategy fail, or are we misinterpreting the results also of that? The second is, and I think you said it very well yourself, that let's not forget that between 2004 and 2011, we had excellent growth, except for that 1 year of 2008. And this was the same government with the same policies. What changed to me, and of course there'll be many people who claim that 2004 on was a momentum of the past, but how long can past momentum continue? Certainly not for 7 years. Clearly the problem is not so much of policy, and particular policies may be right or wrong. I don't want to get into an argument of Narega or food security bill. We all have differing views on it, and I do have a view on it. But I think the point to make across the board at the macro level overall is that between 2004 and 2011, this country grew like it had never grown before. After that, what happened? The same government, the same people, presumably the same policies, may be marginally different. I think the difference was that from 2011, the government not only stopped being bold, as you said, Jagannathan, but I think the government just stopped functioning. It's in a freeze mode. It's neither being bold nor being real. It's just frozen. It's a crisis of leadership. There is no leadership. There is no leader. And I don't know, I think I must respond only because Tavleen sort of implied as if I'm being supportive of some dynasty. I think the biggest problem is that the two so-called leaders whom we have don't open their mouth, or three of them if you take them all together. I don't hear a prime minister, let me say it openly, I don't hear a prime minister saying anything except yes, no, and maybe one sentence here. As for Sonia Gandhi, you wonder whether she can speak. And Rahul Gandhi, of course, just disappears except when the media wants to put a photo, which is a photo op. And of course, the media does nothing about investigating where are these people meantime, what they're doing. What does he think of anything at all, whether it's the food security bill, or Chhattisgarh, or Nawaz Sharif being elected, or Arab Spring? What does he think about it? Who knows? I wonder, maybe somebody who can read minds. So I'm not supportive of the dynasty at all, Tavleen, but nor am I supportive. No, I thought the implication of what you said may seem that I'm a bleeding heart socialist who's dyed in pink. And hey, what am I wearing? If I'm not wearing orange, I should be wearing pink. Yes, I do have leanings and I do have a certain sense of saying that in a poor country like India, there are two ways to go at the two extremes, obviously exaggerated to make the point. One is to say that, as Vivek just said, 300 million people starving, overpopulated country. Hey, simple solution here, let them die. The remaining, 900 million will prosper. That's one point of view. The other point of view is saying we need to raise them up. At the moment, they're very poor. We need to support them till they get skills and education. And we need to find how to do it. The food security bill may not be the best way of doing it. It's not at all true that you need to import food, etc. But I don't want to get into that. The pros and cons can be much argued. There are better ways of doing it. There are better ways of targeting subsidies, which technology enables us to do. We are sort of, blundering our way through it, but clearly that's the direction for the future. But in my view, this is one country, it's like one family, and if somebody is down and out, you help them when they're down and out, not to be on a dole, not to provide a permanent crutch, but till you can help them to be on their own. And till you teach the person how to fish, which may take a few hours, 1 day, 2 days, 5 years, you provide them with fish. So that's, in a way, a longish answer to what you asked, Jaggi.
1 minute. I actually believe that the flaws of the so-called socialism in this country of ours is that they didn't do education, healthcare. No, but you want them to be given khairat, dole, that is what I'm objecting to. Because the money, the thousands of crores that have been spent on Narega, had it been spent on schools, and I actually live in villages and work in them and travel in them all the time. And food security, let me give you a small example. I've been in situations of famine in the worst parts of India, and lives have been saved by a small group like, say, the Jamaat-e-Islami in Akal Kuwa when there was a famine in Narendrabar. All that they did was they had one little school and they opened a free kitchen so the children could eat, because there's children and old people who die. The food security bill is central planning, which is that some bureaucrats in Delhi will control these funds that will be distributed all over the country. Where are the state governments going to store the grain to distribute? We have a broken public distribution system, so that the grain that you see rotting in the rain will rot even more. So it's not that we don't want, I hate poverty. I hate the fact that India is poor, and I believe that the reason why India is poor is because of this kind of statist, paternalistic, statist policies.
Vivek, if I were to ask you in 3 areas, in our politics, in our economics, what are the 2 bold things that you would like to see happen?
Sure, but I just want to, can I just comment briefly on the conversation that just took place, which is, looking at high growth from 2004 till a couple of years ago, 2003, I think is a little misleading, because I think most economists will agree that we were still, in a sense, reaping the benefits of the few reforms that we had earlier done. From 2004 on, we've had no major reform. We've in fact gone back. We've backtracked on reform, and we've gone back to large entitlement programs. But to be fair, Kiran, there is a philosophical debate here. There are those who believe in the entitlement-based welfarist approach. Amartya Sen believes in a rights-based approach. You must create an entitlement, a right to food, and then the food will follow. And there's a different point of view that says, look, the reason people are starving is because they have no income. They have no way of earning a living. So that the fact of poverty is a byproduct of a low level of economic development, and only growth can unleash that. So there's a basic conceptual, philosophical difference that exists here. But again, to be fair, UPA in its first innings at least did reasonably good macroeconomic management. So they didn't sort of mess that up too badly, and the global economy was doing well. We survived the global crisis because of a massive stimulus that you talked about. But I think at this point, the fact that we've done really nothing in the way of much needed second generation reforms. So, again, we come back to it, labor law, infrastructure. To put it in a very simple way, in the first wave of reforms, we liberalized product markets, right? We lowered tariffs, got rid of the worst of the license Raj. But we have factor markets, so labor markets, capital market. The financial system is in dire need of some basic structural reform. And that has not happened at all. So that is what we need to focus on. There's a whole unfinished, whole untapped reform agenda. All the low-hanging fruits have been plucked. And now politically difficult decisions have to be made, where someone has to say, look, this is in the best interests of the country, looking forward, and I have to make a case. I can't keep falling back on the old playbook of let's hand out more doles, let's hand out more money, create more. And the real disappointment for me with the FSB debate, and we have talked about, someone who's written against it, is you have not had a principled stand against it from the opposition. The BJP, which had a golden chance to say, look, as a matter of principle, we oppose this. This is a bad policy. Absolutely. They have not done that. I mean, Mr. Modi spoke out against it, but that was, I think, 2 years ago, and he's remained silent. Now, I understand that it's not much that he can do as a state leader if your central leadership says we support the FSB, but at the level of the central leadership, there was a golden opportunity missed here to say, look, we are different. We don't also subscribe to this populist way of thinking. So that was, I think, a huge missed opportunity. And the irony really in the whole FSB debate is the only guys who actually are, in a sense, genuine are the people on the left, because they actually believe this. They actually are, in a sense, going with their convictions. But everyone else is being totally opportunistic on this.
Yeah. And actually, we have seen clearly that the political class is not bold. The one that's in power is not bold enough to actually go and tackle poverty by identifying who are poor and doing them. They want to feed 2/3 of this country with free grain so that there's more corruption, more problems. So that's where they're not being bold even when they're in government. And the opposition is not being bold for the simple reason that what they do not believe in, they are unwilling to oppose. In fact, they are planning to make the food security bill worse by saying it's not good enough. So that's the other element of cowardice. You have cowardice both in ruling party and the opposition. So nobody is willing to call a spade and do the right thing. So Kiran, I'll just give you the last word before we ask some questions from the audience. So would you like to conclude your argument in some way?
Yeah, yes, just a couple of things. I just agree fully with what you said. Now, I think we need a saner approach to food security. I'm completely with that, but I think we do need some kind of food security. And a quick response to your question. I don't want to get, we can extend this debate. I'm glad we had some disagreement. That makes it more interesting. But to your earlier question to Vivek, I think one of the key things, I think the right to education, again, controversial things, lots of issues there, but I think it's been a good forward step. The right to information has, I think most people agree, been a great step forward. And I think the two critical things now to take it further are, one, a deployment of ways of actualizing the right to information is a way which really empowers people at the grassroots, so as you get a demand-driven, higher efficient delivery system, which means better governance, which is demand pull. It's not somebody delivering good governance, it is demanding good governance, which means it can come when you empower those who can demand that things be set right. So I would say something, and I think technology has a big role to play there. The second one, and again I would see disagreement, but I hope we don't get into argument again, is the right to health. To me, this is more critical than anything else, because if we can make sure there's a health safety net around, not only the poor, but even many, many people who are above that level in the lower middle class, blow up all the savings they ever have because of one incident of serious health problems, because the health system in this country is broken, and the private health system that's coming up is doing well, but it's tremendously expensive and unaffordable to many people. And therefore, people wait till there's a serious crisis, till somebody's on the verge of, dying. Then they rush to hospital and pay a lot of money. And I think if we can assure that, that to me is a far higher priority than even food, because if somebody's in good health, they will work and earn the money to buy food. So I think we've got our priorities a bit wrong. So I would say, one, empowerment, mainly through technology. Second is a right to health, which ensures health everywhere.
Yeah. Tavleen, you obviously
disagree. I really, not only do I disagree, I'm very disappointed to hear what you were saying. Because, when you look back to 1947, the whole of Southeast Asia was as illiterate as India, right? Every country there had the same literacy rates. Today, every country, including Sri Lanka, and pretty soon I'm sure Myanmar, will have literacy rates higher than India's. Does anyone in the audience know why, what the difference was? Have you thought about it? Anyone? Compulsory primary education, which puts the onus of building the schools on the state. What the right to education has done is give the government the right to absolve itself and force private schools to take in children who they should be educating. It is scandalous that 65 years after independence, Government is unable to do what it's meant to do. Give you schools, healthcare, roads. Okay, healthcare. 80% of Indians, by the way, use private health services while we pay taxes for a healthcare system that is broken. That is the reality. And we must be bold enough to face it and confront your elected representatives and the wretched officials from the municipalities and ask them why. Sanitation. In this season in Bombay, the only reason why everybody gets sick is because we haven't even discussed sanitation. Now, is that the job of the private sector? Government has failed to do in India what it's elected to do. And it's not just government, it's governments. Because these are actually state subjects, right? Now, when it comes to employment, Vivek, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you need 30 million new jobs a month in India.
Yeah, just to absorb the labor that's coming on stream.
Now, as long as you force the private sector to ask government's permission to close down a factory that employs more than 100 people, those jobs cannot be created. As long as you keep changing the rules for investment, they cannot be created. Government cannot create the jobs. And I don't know the figure, but every 1% of growth that falls, how many million jobs die? Do you know the figure?
Well, actually, it's not that directly related. I mean, you had slow growth during the NDA regime, but they created 60 million jobs. You had faster growth in the next 7 years, and you created 2 million jobs.
It's the type of growth you have.
It's the type of growth you have.
You have to have labor-intensive growth.
Right. Okay, so we can now take a few questions. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. I'll identify, and you say who you want to ask the question to.
You talked about absorbing kids from poorer areas into private schools. That was for that RTE, that right to education. But just imagine a scenario. Cathedral and John Connon School, it's considered to be an elitist school. How would a boy staying in Dharavi mix with the students of Cathedral? It will in fact create more jealousy in his mind, and that will lead to more crimes rather than RTE.
That was not my point. I actually believe that children from different classes should go to the same school. And if I was in charge of the education system in this country, I would have neighborhood schools and private schools for those who, but I would insist on neighborhood schools so that you go to the school in your street. That is what we haven't done. If we had compulsory primary education, they would have been obliged to build the schools and to have them of a certain standard, because children from the top, from the rich and the poor would go to the same school. But what they've done under this right to education is simply absolve themselves, right? Yeah. And the last great bastion, by the way, of the license Raj is education. Yeah. So that every politician has a niece or a nephew or a son who has a college. And you know why? Or a school? Because then they get land free from the... So the scandal in health and education is something that the media never writes about, and it's a horror story.
People who, like, all these entitlement schemes are aimed at, they are the ones who actually vote. Like in Mumbai, in Kolaba, you had horrible percentages, like 40%, 42%. So a couple of months back, or probably earlier than Rahul Gandhi said that every 10 years the Congress comes up with some kind of scheme which gets them votes. So is this cynicism not well founded on the performance? Like, same people who are going to vote for America, is there any political resonance for growth?
I'll just give you one answer to that. That was the old story. But since the last election, the 75 extra seats that the Congress party got were urban seats. The support that Narendra Modi gets these days is middle-class support. And if you travel in this country, if you drive, you'll see that the distances between urban and rural have really reduced. So the middle classes are going to be a very important factor in the next election, and the politicians haven't woken up to that reality.
I think that's right, and I think it is changing. And in fact, my opening remarks, I suggested that even just in setting a different agenda, the urban middle classes are now playing a role which heretofore they have not played in elections. So yes, traditionally it's been true that the rent, the cities are a site of rent extraction, and then you go and get the votes in the countryside. But that is changing. and at some point, it may be next year, but it may not be till 2019, the middle class will become decisive politically, and that will change the shape of the politics and of the feedback mechanism that politicians get, right? Because as you say, if entitlement schemes and welfare schemes get you votes, you'll keep doing it as a politician. But when that comes back and you lose the election because of corruption, because of poor governance, then a different narrative starts to emerge.
Ma'am just mentioned that go get up and confront. My question is, confront and then be alone and make enemies. How do you deal with that?
The most important thing to be bold and real is courage. And if none of us have the courage to get up and say, you know, everyone in their lives must do it.
I totally agree with you on the point that we are not bold and real. I think inherently us Indians are people who are, we are people who, I think, who find it easier to stand and say wow, rather than try and think who we can be ourselves as an individual. But, do you think, can it be changed through education? Or if we talk about politics and politicians, should we have education in politics? To have, to have a benchmark political, or rather an educational background so that you can enter politics. And now getting back to the dynasty politics that we have in India that you spoke about, and Mr. Kiran refuted that. I mean, I really want to understand whether it is, we cannot have a single pronged approach. Now what I want to know is, how do we go about through education? Because education, as we said, is basic. All around South Asia, that's what we've had. My question is simply that, do we use only education, or do we also include things like parenting? Because that is what, really drives us as an individual.
I think on the first part, though, as someone who spends a good chunk of the year abroad, I strongly disagree. I mean, Indians, we are bold and very dynamic, innovative, but we've got to have the right incentives, the right institutional support. So if you're in a very hierarchical, sort of crony-driven system, then that's going to stifle creativity. But given you go to Silicon Valley, it's Indians and Chinese. Who else are there? So given the right incentives, the right opportunity to be creative, Indians do step up to the plate. On the second point, very briefly, should one have sort of some educational benchmark for our politicians? I mean, that is a difficult concept because that's fundamentally undemocratic. There's no reason why someone who hasn't finished university cannot be a good, shouldn't be allowed to stand and run as an MP or MLA. I think the bigger problem are criminal politicians, which is a major, we haven't talked much about that, but that's a huge problem at the center and in the States. So
they are bold and real too.
They're bold in a different way as well. So, but I'll let...
I'm asking specifically about the food security that we were debating. And the only major argument against it was the philosophical question of whether entitlement is a good way of governance, right? And apart from that, we had plebeian arguments against it, like corruption and things like that, which are specific to individual government systems. Now, the whole question of putting someone through adversity to make them more capable is a vicious circle that we enter into. It's as good as saying you won't save people in the floods because then they won't learn how to swim. So, it's a very bad circle that you start into. So essentially, entitlements are bad once they cross a certain threshold. And what the food security bill does entitle you to is the very basic minimum we think every human is entitled to, right? So apart from the whole question of the fact that it won't be implemented correctly, Tavleen, do you think that, on a very elemental level, on a very philosophical level, entitlement really is that bad a thing, keeping in context what really it's entitling you to?
Okay, I'm not against entitlement. I believe that the scheduled castes and the Adivasis would not have got where they have to be able to compete with all of it. You have a Dalit Chamber of Commerce today. That has come from a degree of entitlement. My objection to the food security bill is the following. I do not believe that the central government can legislate for this to happen. The public distribution system, please just go to your village ration shop. Go anywhere. The people who have created this are leftist NGOs. Right? I object also to the National Advisory Council making the law. and forcing it down the throat of Parliament, because actually you've elected people who should be making the law, and this hasn't come from there. And Narega itself, if you just look at the way how badly that has worked at the village level, you will understand why this can never work. Whereas simpler schemes, like there's an organization called Akshay Patra that works out of Bangalore, and that because it's associated with the Krishna consciousness movement, has been rejected as a model to follow by state governments that believe in secularism. But what they did in Bangalore, and is now replicated across the country, in some states, Rajasthan being one of them, is they create one meal a day in schools. Attendance went up 90%, performance of the children went up 100%. It's an amazing thing. They just create one nutritious meal a day. And they have a system that gets distributed. That in the afternoons, for instance, in Jaipur, in Vasundhara Raje's time, it might have been stopped now, the rickshawalas, the poor people, would come and they would get that one meal a day. I'm not against providing food to the hungry, but I'm against providing the facility for officials to make more and more crores out of a bad scheme.
I think we need to bring this to a quick conclusion. I would just sum it up like this, that if you do not think about the poor, if you do not have a heart, I think you destroy yourself as a human being. But if you're not a thinking human being, you cannot help anybody. Forget the poor. You cannot help anybody. So you've got to mix what you emotionally want to do with what I think is sensible and the right way to do it. A simple point like, say, right to education. We are trying to, 90% of the schools are in the state sector, okay? And the 7 or 8% that are there in the private sector, you think they're going to solve the problem of education in this country. Fix the 90%, not the 10%. That's the way to be bold. Fix the 90%. Don't try to fix the 7% and hobble them. That's the problem. Not, if you have poverty, then don't try and fix 66% of the country and give them free food at 1 rupee and 2 rupee. Fix the 20 or 30% who don't have the food. That you don't want to do. That's the problem. Okay, so we are coming to a close now. Thank you very much. I'm sure some of you can take these questions offline.